Come on.
Comics. You're listening to Around Comics.
From Chicago, you're listening to Around Comics, the comic book podcast where we talk about everything in and around the world of comics. I'm Brian Salazar, and with me is the hostess with the mostest, Mr. Christopher Niesman.
What's going on, buddy?
Nah, you know, hanging in there.
Yeah, just hanging in.
Hanging in.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, you're a little quiet on the mic, I think.
Boop-a-doop. Is that any better?
A little bit.
A little bit.
We both have our...
Is that better?
Sounds the same. I don't know if anything changed.
Is that better?
Is that better? Is that better? We're so professional.
We are. Is that any better?
That seems pretty good.
There. That. Hello? Yes? Maybe? Check 1, 2.
I don't think I can tell the difference.
There. We'll put that there.
That's
come in close.
Come in closer.
So 14 years of doing this, you figure we could get a freaking mic check.
What would be the point?
How you doing, bud?
Yeah, you know, hanging in there pretty good.
Yeah?
Yeah.
You're still well coiffed. Have you gotten that haircut yet?
I did. It's been cut. It's a little long on top right now, but
yeah.
I've definitely had haircuts. Yeah, my barber's open.
Nice.
My barber...
I haven't gone to a barber for years. It's great.
Well, yeah, you don't have that problem.
I do not. It's awesome. Go to the barber every morning in the shower.
I'll deal with it. You know.
Yeah. I was watching Jack Black. He's Jablinski Games. Have you ever watched that on YouTube?
No, what is that?
It's basically Jack Black. I would say slowly descending into madness during COVID quarantine.
Well, I mean, he was kind of close always, so
he was a little close. And I stumbled across it because he was doing basically a Jack Black version of a game channel. It's Jablinski Games, and it's him playing Red Dead Redemption 2, which I've been playing, and it's hilarious because he narrates it as an old-timey Western guy the entire time, and he plays video games pretty much like I do, to where you're pretty like almost once per video he's like, God damn, I'm so bad at video games.
Yeah, I've just about given up on him. I'm so terrible at him at this point.
Yeah.
You know, I saw Jack Black. I saw Tenacious D many years ago.
Yeah,
and their opening band. This is how long ago it was. Their opening band when we went and saw them was this little like ska punk band with a female singer called No Doubt. I don't know if you've
that's
heard
awesome.
of them. Yeah,
that's cool.
They were awesome. They were phenomenal because they were, you know, they hadn't turned into sort of the pop sensation that they ended up being, but
it was before the top 40 success. They Jack Black and I forget his partner from
Kyle.
Tenacious D. Huh?
Kyle,
yes, Kyle.
Kyle Glass, I think it is. Kyle, yeah, Glass.
This may have been from a Hot Ones episode. They did Hot Ones, which is one of my favorite YouTube channel. You've seen that, right? With the interview with the progressively hotter chicken wings. It's a great show. But I think that may have been where they talked about like their worst gig ever, and I think it was like Miller Lite or somebody. It was I think a beer company or a soda company that did this big promote of come to LA for this massive rock concert giveaway thing, and so the people who won this had no idea who the star band was for this awesome rock concert. You know, I think they were like expecting like, you know, U2 or some, you know, huge
big band,
some big band, and it was Tenacious D. And he said, yeah, the curtain opens and they announced Tenacious D, and it was just rains and rains of booze. And if they had you know, rotten, you know, vegetables, they would have, you know, hoisted them up upon the stage. It was pretty. He's like, yeah, it was the worst idea ever for us to do as a band.
They were really fun though. I mean, they actually could play. I mean, you know, it just you gotta know what you're getting into with them. I think if you're going to a show and you think you're getting like this awesome rock band, and then you end up with Tenacious D,
they are an awesome rock band. They were the most awesomest rock band.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose so. In one way, they are for sure.
Oh, yeah. So we were talking a little bit earlier. We both had some golf experiences this weekend. It was the first time in 3 years I've swung a golf club, and the results were predictable.
I went once last year. I used to golf a lot. I went once last year. I went this morning.
It was good to get outside.
Yeah, it was
with nature
early, and it got hot by the time we were done, but it was nice.
Mine was a scramble. It was a charity golf outing with a bunch of my curling friends, and one of the it's a couple that I curl with, and they do an annual golf outing for ALS research, and so it was a ALS fundraiser, which was great. So we were out there for a good cause and got to see some friends that I haven't seen since the winter time, and go out and be, you know, responsibly socially distanced and be one with nature. It was nice. It's a good time.
Be one with nature.
We were one with nature. I only went through 2.5 sleeves of balls in 18 holes.
I lost one because I hit it too far.
One sleeve? No,
one ball.
That's yeah. I went through about $12 worth of balls, and they're like, "Aren't you going to look for that?" And I'm like, I haven't golfed in 3 years. Probably not going to golf for another 3 years. Those balls are one with nature now. They're part of the ecosystem.
I lost one and I found 5.
Yeah, there's a little bit of that. So it was fun. It's, you know, finding those things to do through all of this silliness. So Tom's going to join us in a little bit, and we're going to talk about Tiananmen 1989, which we've been teasing here for a little bit. And then Sal, it's your pick after this, right? You're up.
I believe it is. Yeah, I believe
so you got your pick all picked out.
I don't know yet. I haven't.
You're waffling.
I'm waffling between two different books. One that speak of the devil. There's the devil. Speak of the devil.
Tom.
Hey, what's up?
Hi, Tom.
View, or do we like this view?
I like that.
I like that better.
Yeah.
Okay.
That way you can see my dogs walking around in the bedroom.
No. I don't like the 3 narrow. I feel like
we were just talking some golf, Tom.
Shit, that's some boring stuff.
Right. Shit, what can we do after Tom gets here?
Yeah.
We got to stretch. We had to stretch before you
We got to talk golf.
Like, yeah. So, what have you been watching on YouTube this week?
I'm glad I missed the golf talk. Jeez.
You know, it is Hatch chili pepper season, so I was going to start talking about Hatch chilies. So you really saved us, Tom.
Yeah. Well, I got some tomatoes ripening on the vine as we speak. You know, it's time of year.
It's tomato talk.
It's tomato talk.
Tomato talking around comics. I was watching a glass blowing competition. Have you seen that? On
A glass blowing competition.
Yeah.
Who could
Blown
blow
away.
glass?
Blown away, and it's a.
Oh, I've seen that. Yeah, it's like Top Chef for glass blowers.
Yeah.
Blown away.
Blown away. It was interesting.
Yeah, it is kind of. It's a little bit of like Forged in Fire meets Top Chef.
It was, yeah, it definitely, it's, you know, I mean, they make a show like that out of anything now. You can, like, any kind of competition, baking, cooking, knife making, you know, they can do with no trucker competitions. I'm still waiting for truck driving competition show. What the hell? Nothing like
Long
that.
hauled away.
Yeah.
Hauling ass.
It's like when I moved back from Massachusetts and the guy that was driving the moving truck, I assumed when they picked up all our stuff, it was like in this big 18-wheeler semi. And I assumed when they were going to bring it to our place in Chicago, they were going to put it into a smaller truck. But the same truck just showed up. And the dude parallel parked it like on Kimball Avenue. It was the wildest thing. It was the wildest thing I've ever seen.
I don't know if I could parallel park like a Mini Cooper on Kimball.
I was like, he was like, oh yeah, I got this. And I was like, oh, okay. And he did it. And I was like, that's all right. That's
a man
impressive.
right there.
Yeah.
That's a real man.
Parallel parking a semi truck in a busy Chicago street. And one go, just one smooth, just like backed it right in.
No rocking back and forth.
There was no back and forth. He just
the only truck
parked it
I've
right
ever
in there.
driven in the city was like a box truck. I used to drive a box truck once in a while for this company I was working for, and I was like,
"Who was that?
What's that?
Cap?
No, it was before Cap. And just every once in a while we'd have a job in the city and I'd have to take a box truck down there, and it was a nightmare, like trying to, you know, I was like 20. I barely had driving experience of a truck at all, and these guys would just send me into the city with this rented truck. I think I fucking clipped somebody's BMW once. It's like, yeah, sorry, and just kept going.
I just got a new car and traded in the old Santa Fe, which is probably the car that you guys have known that I've driven since like 2009, and I took it to the dealer up here in Wisconsin and traded it in. It's like, yeah, this car's been through some shit, hasn't it? It's like, oh yeah, I lived in Chicago for 15 years. And I'm like, oh, okay.
It got beat up. Some box truck hit it.
Yeah, it was some box truck clipped me.
On a box truck.
Guy never stopped. He just waved as he went by.
Yeah, it had some city scars on it, which was.
I remember going like one of the not first times, but when my kids were real smaller and we went into the city and like parking, and, you know, just sort of the little Chicago bump you might give somebody a bumper.
Not everyone appreciates the bump.
My daughter like freaking out, you know, when I was doing that. And it's just like, yeah, that's, you know, you got to. What are you gonna do? You got to park.
We got to make a little room here.
Yeah.
It's a little Chicago bump. So Tom, I think we're gonna jump into Tiananmen 1989, and then see how that goes, and maybe talk some other comics here. But are you ready to talk about your book choice?
Yeah,
your book of the quarter.
My book of the quarter. Yeah, I'm excited to talk about it. Tiananmen 1989, Our Shattered Hopes. I got it correct this time instead of the subtitle that I gave the wrong one that time. Written by Lun Zhang, who teamed up with French journalist Adrien Gambaud, with art by, I love this name, Amazien, I'm going to guess, since it's French, but I could be on. Amazien. Yeah, it's a great little nonfiction book that I think is extremely relevant to our times, and very, the phrase "a picture is worth, 1,000 words" or whatever. This book is kind of like an interesting way of thinking about that not being actually true at all, because for many people, what happened in Tiananmen Square in 1989 is essentially boiled down to a photo, like the famous photo,
the guy in front of the tank.
The guy in front of the tank.
I'll raise my hand on that. That's about all I knew of him.
All you know about it, right? And so you walk away. At least even I did, like I've always thought like, oh, okay, like that was like a big moment, that guy standing up to that tank, which of course, that guy standing up to the tank is of course, an incredible moment. But if that's all you know, then you've missed out on, the fact that the day before that happened, there was like a huge slaughter of protesters, right? So like, over time, it's sort of like that picture has sort of, I think, become all that Tiananmen Square is about, right? That's all anybody knows about it. And you can walk away with almost like, oh, they won, like the good guys won. But it's not true.
That's not the takeaway.
That's not like
that
you're not getting the
takeaway.
You've missed out on what the actual story is and what's happened. And the amazing thing is that the Communist Party in China has effectively pretty much erased it from their history. It's doing some research about this book. It's common for people under the age of 30 to not even know Tiananmen Square happened in China. Like it's just not known. It's like been pretty much erased from history.
That's insane. I mean, it's insane, but it's not as insane as like 20 years ago. If you told me that,
yeah,
like I can kind of like, oh yeah, I could see that happening. Like,
yeah.
But if you would have told me that 20 years ago, I was like, come on, that couldn't possibly
be true. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, it goes back to like World War II, whenever they found the concentration camps, and it was Eisenhower who basically said that he wanted as many American troops to walk through those concentration camps as possible. And they said, why? He's like, because at some point, people are going to deny that this ever happened. And so we need as many people as possible to see this, that this happened. And I mean, the Tiananmen is a perfect example of, yes, when things like this happen, people in power will deny that it took place, and we're seeing that in real time.
Yeah, and if you haven't read the book or don't know exactly what's happening, it's written by Lun Zhang was a professor in Tiananmen when this happened. He was one of the people that essentially, because he was one of the oldest people involved in the protests, he ended up sort of trying to organize it. He was like the adult in sort of like what was happening.
These are all college kids.
Yeah, and he's essentially, he's been exiled from China since then. I mean, he's now in France. He can't go back. Many of the people who were involved in the protests who did escape can never go back, right? So like, it's a really, as somebody who prides himself on knowing a lot of history, I can't say that I was ever taught what actually Tiananmen Square, what actually happened and what it was about. And to read this book is like, it's a tight book. It's not a belabored, long explanation. He gives you enough to understand what's happening. Doesn't get like bogged down in like too much like sort of complicated politics of what's happening. Like he explains, the setting and why things are happening, and gives enough flavor to the different characters within the book that you can kind of start to
the gradual opening of China to the West.
Yeah.
That kind of created the environment for people to really crave democracy and an opening of human rights and free journalism, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and like the approach to both the storytelling, the art does a really great job of conveying both the fact that this happened, right? Like it's not like a sort of artistic embellishment, right? Like you get the sense of like they're trying to capture things that has happened, but still give it like an emotional resonance to it of like through the art, which I thought was really great. And like I thought it was really one of the best nonfiction books I've read in a long time, as far as like I totally understand what happened. You know, history can be really complicated. And like for Americans, we're never taught how to understand like history of China, of Japan. Like those are things like, even, you know, when I was a kid and you go through history, you know, history is taught differently than math, right? Like math, you learn how to do addition, then you learn subtraction, then you learn multiplication, then everything builds on each other. But when you take like history in 8th grade, they just teach you history. And then if you take history again, which some people might not, they'll be like, actually, no, this is history. And then they teach it all to you again, but like the version that you can understand. And then if you take it again, they're like, actually, this is history. And then you learn that version of history that's the more complicated version, right? You know, like you go from Thanksgiving is this to actually Thanksgiving was awful. And it's a, like,
yeah, you know what? It had nothing to do with states' rights.
Yeah, exactly. And in America, you know, I feel like it's really interesting to me that I feel we're very China illiterate, both like historically, like geographically, like we're just not.
It's immense. I mean, you talk about Chinese history, and I know a little. I mean, like a little. I mean, a sliver, because my wife got her master's in traditional Chinese medicine, so she's, you know, acupuncturist and herbalist and that. What did you say? But part of that, I mean, part of that was like the medical history of China, and you start to get a little bit of an idea of how immense that history is.
Yeah.
Our history as a country goes back to, you know, like the 1700 something, you know, whatever, you know, pre-revolution. Chinese history goes back thousands of years.
Yeah.
It's the history.
Yeah, I mean, it's, to me, it's like more than just like the length of time. It's like an understanding of like the bases of culture, right? Or of the only things we're taught about Chinese history are when Western countries interact with China. And then it's like essentially that's it, right?
Marco Polo, the Great Wall of China, and Nixon.
Right. So like in a sense, what makes this story really interesting in a lot of ways is that it's about Chinese history within China, like the actual things, the tensions and the arc of history within the country itself. That's not necessarily like, now here's the time when England landed in Hong Kong, right? Like it's just almost a version of history that I can't say that I've ever read about China or like have been exposed to truly.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I get that as well. Like, it was a really interesting perspective to read it from. Obviously, someone, you know, the narrator being someone that lived it and was in the middle of it. So that was really interesting, and not having. I mean, in the spring of 1989, I was 18 years old, and I remember seeing it on TV. You know, the guy standing in front of the tank and the protesters, and so I had a little bit of a history of it. I knew a little bit of it, but I mean, that could have been, you know, in another situation. It's like I could have been a college student at that, you know what I mean? Like at that time. And the idea of like these college students, you know, doing this and making, you know, these protests to try and change things. And one of the things that was really interesting to me in the book was at one point that, you know, he's talking about how they weren't trying to change the country. They weren't trying to change communism or work outside of the system. They were just going, this is unfair. within the system. We believe in what the country. We believe in the party and everything else, but this is unfair and it needs to change, which I thought was really kind of interesting in comparison to like, what we see today, a lot of the protesting going on of sort of this, burn everything to the ground and rebuild from the ashes, which I don't know, is particularly wise or effective a way to protest. Because if you look at like this story and one of the, kind of really important moments in it was initially when the army was coming to Tiananmen Square, like they were stopped by people just like regular citizens in the country. Like we're blocking roads and keeping the army from coming in because they believed in what these kids were doing. These were their children and they supported them. And I think a big part of that was because of the way that they were doing it. You know what I mean? Like they were garnering support throughout the country because they were, justified in what they were attempting to do. Like the unfair things that were going on were, I mean, any kind of right-minded person would probably agree with them. So like, I thought that was a really interesting thing. And, like I said, especially in sort of comparison to what we see going on in this country today, which I don't even understand.
Like, going on in China today, my memories. We're just a couple years apart. We're a little older than Tom. In 1989, I was a sophomore in high school, and I think you were senior, right?
I graduated in '89, so yeah.
And I remember some of the news reports of what was going on in China and Tiananmen Square, and it's hard looking back on that through like a 30-year-old spyglass, but I don't feel like it's any different in how it was reported than what's going on in Hong Kong right now. It's the same thing is going on right now, is that you have these people, and mostly young people, that are crying out for democracy, and it's being reported. I feel like history is repeating itself right now, 30 years later, and reading this kind of gave some insight, kind of like Tom said, in understanding the background and the history of that country, and how the people that live there have to kind of digest that the whatever the message is from the government, which is not always truthful.
Yeah, I mean, it was really well done. That is one of the biggest things that I have, as I've gotten older, I've become, I think it's just sort of a natural thing. You become a little more interested in history, certainly more so than when I was younger. But one of the hard parts of it for me a lot of times is the context of like, okay, well, what led to this moment? It's like I want to understand, what led to a particular moment in time, like what was going on in the world or in the country or around those times. And this, I felt like, did a really good job of that, of setting you up and explaining enough history before this period, enough of the politics, but didn't, like you said, Tom, it didn't overwhelm you with it. It gave you just enough to understand the context of, okay. And it did, and I thought it really did it, in almost too fair of a way. Like it wasn't, you would kind of think this book would be a bit more
radical,
or say that again?
More radical.
No, I just think more
angry,
and it's not. It's like this, which was really an interesting thing. It was like there wasn't like an anger. There wasn't even today. Like there was a sorrow, and almost just like a sadness that they didn't accomplish what they wanted to accomplish. As much as they were trying to stand up to the government and make things change, it didn't really happen. Like I said, this isn't a happy story. This is a tragedy. And nothing's really was affected by what these kids did. And a big part of that is because because it was erased, because nobody knew, because people didn't understand you know, and it's interesting now to sort of look at it and go, well, you know, if this story was more well known, you know, how many other countries would have supported these kids, or how many other people around the world? It's such a weird thing to think that, you know, it's like I think back to like the Vietnam War, and you know, a big part of like the end of the Vietnam War was the media, you know, like the media presence in Vietnam and the journalists that were there, the photographers and the videographers and the TV people that were there showing the world and the United States what was really going on there for the first time. And I mean, that was the first time in a war that really that kind of unfettered view of the horrors of war were seen, and that was a big part of, you know, the people that ended up protesting and the pressure that was put on politically in this country to stop that war. And it's just weird to think in like 1989 that, you know, the Chinese government had that power to just sort of like close the doors and just not allow people to see what was really going on. Like I said, I remember
or in 2020.
Or in 2020, yeah, for sure. I mean,
because it hasn't changed.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, that is, I mean, that's our shattered hopes. They tried to change things in 1989 and they didn't, and we're still seeing it 30 years later that it's a government that is able to literally shut down anything that they don't want circulated, whether it's on social media. You know, that's certainly made it more difficult, is the internet and social media. But yeah, it's you know, utter control by a communist regime.
And it's so like you take it for granted, you know, I mean, our entire lives of like the freedoms that we really truly have. I mean, you know, whatever is wrong with this country, and certainly there are things that are wrong and need to be fixed and changed. Like, you do have to look at like we still have way more freedom of speech and protections,
sure,
those things, than a lot of countries around the world.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, and it is an interesting to look at that and just be like, you kind of take it for granted.
I can post on Facebook that I think our president is a reprehensible human being that has no business being in a position of power. And I can do that without fear that I'm going to be imprisoned for it.
Well, but there is you can
for now. I mean, today,
but really, like we're getting we're like getting to this point with social media where some of those freedoms are being stripped away because people are being canceled, if you will, for saying things, or, you know, on Twitter, you know, 10 years ago, and then, you know, having their lives completely changed. You know, not to try and like make apologies for people that say stupid things or do horrible things or whatever, but like the idea that you have to be careful of saying something on Twitter in fear of losing your job is fucking terrifying. The idea that there are people like actively trying to, you know, harm other people in that way because they don't like what someone says is insane to me. Like,
I will guarantee you that there are things that I said on this show 12 years ago that would in today's world get me banned or fired or whatever, especially if taken out of context.
Well, but there's a difference. There's things that people say that, listen, if you tweet something, if you tweet a racial epithet 8 years ago, it doesn't take fucking Sherlock Holmes to go find it.
No,
like scroll back.
The internet knows.
Yeah, like
right.
It's like all right, then you did say it. Like, all this cancel culture shit is like, if all these people are canceled, why do I keep fucking hearing them all the time? like, oh my God, I can't, you know, like there are cases of people
like being censored or being like concerned. Because yeah, it's one thing like if someone is a horrific racist, but that doesn't mean that it's not a slippery slope and it becomes something that
Sure.
like where does
But I think the core of what we're talking about is that, there's the cancel culture is one thing. Having the government incarcerate you is something else.
I mean, listen, if you're a baseball player and you tweet out some racist stuff like 8 years ago and you've only tweeted 10 things since then, like, dude, yeah, someone's going to ask you about it because, like, yeah, like, you shouldn't have said that. Like, I think the cancel culture stuff's so overblown and so just like not that big. It's like, have you ever read the book "So You've Been Publicly Shamed"?
I have.
By John Ronson. So the examples in there are really interesting because the woman who told the joke that got like that. To me, I'm always suspicious of. I'm not compelled by the slippery slope argument because I think that most of the time, like we build stairs. We know how to do all these things, right? Like we're not constantly like sliding into oblivion, right? Like, so to me, I look at it case by case, and like I think
you're a reasonable human being, Tom.
Yeah,
you're not on Twitter trying to get people fired because something they said 12 years ago.
Yeah, but also it's just like who are all these people that have gotten fired?
I don't know. I mean,
yeah.
My point is though, not necessarily like whether or not who has gotten fired, who is the person.
Yeah, I get it. Yeah.
It's worked on or not. My point is, at what point come back around to just someone doesn't like it? I mean, look at like, it's a stupid example because I really don't give a shit about what happens to Ellen DeGeneres, but the idea that like her show is in danger, her career and her livelihood is in danger because someone that worked for her didn't like something that she said. Like, where does that end? When does the sensitivity of like, at what?
But also, like, sounds like she treated her staff terribly.
Okay, but then don't work for her. Then go get another job.
Okay.
Does that mean so?
Then she can go find another job too. I just don't understand what the
way more.
Why does Ellen deserve a show more than another person deserves a job?
I think Ellen created that.
Sure.
Show. I mean,
I'm sure she can find a job,
and obviously, she has something that people want to see. If you did,
then she shouldn't have a problem.
Well, but that's not necessarily the case.
Well, is it or not? No, she lost her show or not?
What's the truth? Because one person or two people or five people say that maybe she didn't.
But you're bringing up an example of something that she hasn't lost her show.
Well,
she just gave her all she had to do was give people 5 days off.
But that's in that example. But the next thing, I mean, when is it? It's always going to be something someone doesn't like about their boss.
Yeah,
like at some point, it's always going to be something someone doesn't like about someone else. My point is like the idea of like regulating people's speech and getting people fired because of something they say on social media is fucking ridiculous and insane. And the idea of like that's a good thing in some way, like that's a positive thing in some way. I don't see it. I don't see how that's helping anything.
No, I mean, we're talking about what is a step too far? At what point does something become too much? It's where is where is the line?
Of course,
where's the line between Ellen DeGeneres and Harvey Weinstein?
Anything is too much. Anything too much of anything is bad, right? Like I'm not always convinced that all this like that there's something magical about social media that's all that much different than if someone had said something out loud that was bad in the past that someone heard and would have brought up.
Yeah.
Like if anything, the thing that's changed is the desire, a growing upswell for people to be accountable for things they've said, whether it's out loud or on social media. So I think there's a balance between it. I mean, I think there's always going to be examples of it going too far, but I also think there's always going to be examples of like, maybe this person should be held accountable or have to answer to it. It doesn't mean that they, have to disappear. But you should ask them about it.
To a nameless, faceless mob on the internet that could be 3 people, could be 300 people. You don't really know, and it's amplified through this.
Sure. Again, those are anything where it goes too far is obviously bad. But also, like, if you've said something in the past that's shitty, and someone, not saying that 300 people are bringing it, but someone
bring it back.
Hey, like, here's a tweet. Why did you say this? Then no, you should answer for it. You said it.
Yeah.
Like, okay, or apologize, or say you believe it, or
say that you've learned and grown and you no longer believe it.
People have done that all the time and they are fine.
Bringing it back to the book,
yeah.
My point is, whose responsibility is it to do that? I mean, in the book, it's the Chinese government's responsibility and shut these people down because it's what's best for them, and they've decided that. So now we're basically doing the same thing of shutting people's freedom of speech down based on because you don't like
or just don't go on Twitter. Or just like don't tweet stuff on.
Okay, well, tell the 30 million people that are on Twitter that not. But
yeah,
I mean, like that's
unrealistic. There's a huge difference. There's such a huge difference between people on Twitter are complaining and the government is telling me I can't talk. It's like it's totally different.
I don't.
It's so different.
Okay.
It's yeah.
I just don't want. I just think the idea of allowing people to effectively censor people and try to get people fired from the job because you don't like what they said. And
the president of the United States can tweet whatever he wants, and there's thousands of people responding and complaining about it. There's so many people on social media who say whatever they want all the time, whether it's wrong, and people get angry at them. So I guess I just don't see where are all these countless examples.
How many people's lives that woman who tweeted that one stupid joke?
Well, that is true. That's a great example of your point. That is a great example of your point.
Her life is completely destroyed while she's sleeping on a plane because people decided they didn't like a joke.
Yeah. But to me, for every one of those, there's also, some weirdo lunatic who's like tweeting out misinformation about, that's
the problem. You're making a judgment about a weirdo lunatic that might say something you don't appreciate.
Well, yeah, we're all talking about, we all have to make judgments.
It's sort of living in a country with freedom. You're not going to like what everybody has to say.
Yeah, that's very true.
Well, and that going back to the book is who has the authority to censor people? Is it culture? Is it society? Or is it a small group of people in the government? Right?
None of the above.
I also don't. I guess I just don't think strangers on Twitter are the same as the Chinese government. But they're both bad. They can both be bad.
They're the same thing, Tom. I'm not saying it's obviously there's a difference between a government, institutionalizing censorship on a national level and people getting fired off of Twitter. I was just saying
we agree then.
Yeah, I think they're different. I don't think it's a good thing, one or the other. I don't think either one are good.
Yeah, they're both evil. The Chinese government and Twitter are both evil. I think we've decided.
There's a great I won't quote it because it's inappropriate. There's a great Tyler the Creator quote about cyberbullying that I'll share with you guys later.
Okay.
It's that is not an appropriate thing for me to quote, but I'll share it with you guys later. That I think is would be a great exclamation point to this conversation.
Back to
speech, Tom.
What was that? No, it's funny. It's funny. You'll think it's funny. I'll text it to you guys.
You're worried that someone won't like what you're saying.
Well, no. When you see it, it's not a thing for me to say.
He's showing restraint.
I'm showing restraint.
Back to the book. Did you guys, as I kept kind of getting into the book, I really felt it was more like a documentary than a comic. Almost, it was the most documentary feeling comic that I've read in a long time. There's another one that I almost had to reread. Oh, hold on. Probably the last book that I read that felt like this was Cuba, My Revolution. I don't know. Did you guys remember reading this? It's Dean Haspiel and Irvana Lopez. It's a fantastic graphic novel about the revolution in Cuba. It reminded me a lot, or Tiananmen reminded me a lot about it. But they both kind of read almost as like biopics or documentaries through the spyglass of someone who was on the ground and involved with this. It's kind of like the one person's retelling of a seismic shift historical event. And that's really what Tiananmen kind of felt like, was like, okay, this is this one person's retelling of something that needs to be remembered as a major historical event in the last century. And I think that's the fear, is that, I mean, you said, Tom, that people 30 years and younger, a lot of them don't even recall this as being something of import. And I think books like this, that's kind of the flagpole that they put, is like, this needs to be remembered as something that, people died, and they died for a reason. And, there's a weight to that. And, for a graphic novel to be able to do that was kind of like the documentary that I had from it.
I don't think I read that book, so I will agree with you.
Cuba, My Revolution.
Yeah, I didn't read that.
It's you'd love it. It's great. It's really about here. Let me pass it to you.
Yeah, that would have been. Yeah, we got to do that sometime as a visual joke.
I was like, I did, not that I found it hard, but like I wasn't sure who the speaker, like the narrator of this book was.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even though they kind of explained it, for whatever reason, like I assumed he was the dude in front of the tank. Like I never knew that nobody knows who that guy is.
Yeah, no one knows who it is. Yeah, it's crazy.
Away. Like I was like, really? That nobody knows who that guy just got in front of a tank and then wandered off. Like that guy would be a YouTube star now.
He's probably dead.
Channel.
I mean, yeah, it's crazy because it's like, if people know anything about that, it's that picture, right? And like, no one knows who it is. Yeah. It's perhaps not the greatest representation of what actually happened, just from like, the dichotomy of like, of course, they didn't run over the guy in the middle of the day, but the night before they did. Like that's the interesting tension between what people know about it and like the truth of it, right? It's like this picture that, if you know anything about it, it's this. It doesn't represent the thing you think it does entirely.
Yeah, it's a very poetic picture. I mean, it represents the ideal of stand-up, but in reality, that guy probably got shot later.
Nobody knows what happened to it. Yeah,
we don't even know. Who knows? Like he could have been. Yeah. It's it's a weird thing. Like, it's also one of the things like nowadays that kind of frustrates me with, how we're getting back to this sort of thing of like communism and socialism is this like these trigger, fear words that, and it's like, okay, what Bernie Sanders is trying to do is not,
it's not
really communism. Like, if you want to know, like, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I don't even understand like what real like read which is an incredibly dense fucking book, but like anything about Stalin and it's like this isn't even fucking close. Like you have no clue if you don't understand the difference between like socialized medicine and
yeah.
communism.
Yeah, and like forced collectivism of like farms. It's like there's a difference between the two of them. Yeah, I mean, and also the book's interesting just in light of like sort of Cold War hangover culturally of like what Americans think of communist countries, or like what our perspective is, like where we never really had a firm grasp of what happened inside those countries, whether culturally, like we had the version, they're the bad guys, right? But like sort of the grasp of, and something that reminds me a little bit of it actually is the Chernobyl show on HBO about like showing like the reality inside these places that you think you understand, or you have this monolithic vision of what these places are like. And then you're sort of exposed to a story that's like, actually, there's all kinds of tensions happening within that place with people who believe different things and people who like don't see eye to eye about what the grand mission of this society is, right? And, seeing those stories about these places that we think we know or we think we understand, but it's like much deeper, right? And that not all the interesting history is just like when we go crashing into someplace or someplace comes crashing into us, right? Like there's a depth to these other places that's really interesting.
So
history is not like a Rambo movie?
It is not always a Rambo movie. Sometimes it is.
Well, I think that's I think part of it too is just like, okay, how do you sort of boil things down to any sort of comprehension level? You know what I mean? Like, especially in school, like it's like, oh, we weren't taught that in school. Like motherfucker, you were not paying attention to history. So don't blame high school your high school history because you didn't have a well-rounded vision of world history.
It's also crazy to try and teach world history.
Yeah, that's
in a year. It's an insane task
to a 16-year-old.
Right. Like, I mean, it's kind of crazy, but one of the funny things, not funny things, but one of the things, a couple of things on this that has brought to mind is like talking about world history is I have a neighbor who is from Poland. Him and his family are from Poland. And he came here, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago. And he owns like a landscaping company and does a lot of like manual labor stuff and real hardworking guy. But in Poland, he was a history professor, of Polish history. He was he was like ancient Polish history. That was his sort of specialty. And it's like, yeah, that's not really going to do him any good here. He can't, it's like he comes here. It's like, yeah, nobody gives a shit about ancient,
Well, you go to the south side of Chicago, he'd be okay.
maybe. But one of the other things I thought about with this book, and like you're talking about, like the idea of like not having a perspective on things and the depths and sort of intricacies. There's a terrific documentary, and I can't remember the name of it now, but it's on the Vietnam War. It's on Netflix. I think it just came out in the last year. And one of the interesting things was like, the idea of like communism spreading, like, that was the reason we got into the Vietnam War was communism spreading. Same thing with the Korean War. And, it's like, if we don't stop them there, it's just going to spread and spread and spread. And it's like, that didn't happen. Like we lost that fucking war. And yet communism didn't spread at all in that area. Like, this sort of simple, ideas that have created these gigantic situations in history because of like just short-sightedness. You know what I mean? Like just sort of like this short-sightedness of governments and no context. And the other thing that drove me insane about that documentary was the idea like and I don't remember the person's name, but there was like sort of one of the early leaders of the Viet Cong. They weren't even called the Viet Cong at the time, but he was like one of the early leaders. He had reached out to like the CIA and basically like, help us stop this. Like, this is wrong. You need to help us. And they just completely ignored the fucking guy. It's like, if you would have just stepped in then, millions of lives would have been saved, like, but no.
I mean, that the North Vietnamese hated the Chinese.
Yeah. I mean, they literally reached out to the CIA and were just like, you need to help us. You need to, be our ally and help us stop this. And we just completely ignored them. And it's just like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, I didn't, I had no,
there's a great documentary. Now that we're talking about documentaries, because this book does read to me like a documentary. If you've seen The Fog of War, it's a Errol Morris documentary with it's Robert McNamara, who was the Secretary of Defense during Vietnam. It's a great documentary about that time, and him kind of admitting that they were kind of flying by the seat of their pants. They didn't really understand the geopolitics of that part of the world. And it was like this monolithic vision of, we just have to stop the creep of communism, and they didn't understand what was really the history of that region, the way that those countries interacted with each other, and tens of thousands of American lives and a million Vietnamese lives were lost because basically some old white men didn't understand what the fuck was going on over there.
Well, I mean, depending on whose opinion, it could have been even more insidious than that, like,
sure.
But yeah, I mean, it's just, it's so hard, like, in the moment though, as like, I mean, shit, I look back at like in the 90s with Desert Storm, my cousin, a guy 2 weeks older than me, we grew up like brothers. He happened to join the military a year before, Desert Storm, and ends up, in fucking burning oil fields and is literally like physically fucked up for the rest of his life from that. But at the time, like, I remember waking up that morning that we were at war with Iraq and sitting around a TV with a bunch of my friends, we're young guys, and we're all sitting there going, okay, we might have to sign up. Because it was just like the gymnastic ideal of, this is an enemy. This is our enemy. These are the bad guys. But in that moment, when you're young and just you don't have a perspective on it, it's so difficult, I think, to look at things differently. I think we're changing that. I think those things are kind of change. Oh, and I was going to say, going back to like high school history, I was surprised. My daughter actually brought home, they had to read The People's History of the United States by
Howard Zinn,
which is a fascinating book.
Yeah.
So I think that stuff is changing to a certain degree.
I do think so. Yeah. I mean, that book to me is like the 101 of like, hey, actually, history is about this. It's not, Do
you ever listen to Dan Harmon's or Dan Harden?
I do. This is an entirely separate, much longer and probably boring conversation about hardcore history that I don't know if I want to derail this show with. I admire how entertaining it is, and I think it's an excellent way of getting people interested in history. My only criticism of it is it slips into great men of history territory sometimes, where it feels very like it's sort of traditional in that sense, in a non-traditional format in a way, like, and some of them I enjoy more than others. Sometimes I'm kind of like, I don't, like, right. But it's cool. I think I admire the entertainment, and I think if it gets people interested to get into more stuff, that's always a good thing. Like to make you curious to find out, because there's no single show can explain everything, right? Because like, of course you can't. Like it's the more you read about something, the more you're like, I don't know anything about this. Like this.
I think it's so difficult to know, like to try and know the reality of any major or even minor historical events. Like to know, like I don't know. I mean,
I've always wanted to do a parody version of hardcore history about something very mundane, because I think that style is so, like when he slips into his like quoting a book voice just makes me laugh. I don't know why, because it's so like dramatic.
I love history.
I know, but it doesn't do it all the time. I think it's like certain ones where it's just the way it'll hit me sometimes. It'll make me, I admire it. I think he does a really great job of making history accessible and interesting.
Yeah, well, I think that's definitely something. Anything educating people, I think, in some way. I mean, well, once again, it's going to be like how much of it. How do you know what any of it? Howard Zinn's book's really entertaining.
Yeah,
sort of like, goes, no, this is what history really was. Okay, but
yeah,
how much of that is?
Yeah, I think it's great.
Either like it's very.
Howard Zinn's a book that you give to somebody who thinks that they know history, and hardcore history is something you give to someone who like doesn't give a fuck about history. Like the Howard Zinn book's like a great way of being like, oh, you've like learned all your great man of history stuff, and like history is driven by battles and leaders, and it's the pitting of great like leaders against each other, and that book's a really great way of deflating, or at least changing your perspective. I can only imagine reading that book when it first came out, right? When like that wasn't, I think that viewpoint's much more prevalent now of like, it's more complex. But when that book probably first came out, that was probably like, what, like history's not just, like this prime minister met this like the pitting of great men against each other, like there's stuff that happens. There's all kinds of other people
about that, Tom. Why is it you can't accept any great man in history?
No, I mean, I think that is part of it, but I think he does a really good job of being like, there's all these other people alive who are like, things are happening to them.
Growing corn.
Yeah. I mean, it's a book that I think now doesn't seem as revolutionary as it was when it
definitely not as radical.
Yeah.
What about, have you seen Oliver North's The History of the United States, or people's?
No.
It's interesting.
Oh God.
I mean, it's not. It's interesting. I don't know.
What is it? I've never even heard of it. What is it?
It's Oliver North's sort of
history
of the United States.
Jesus Christ.
Giving you a history lesson on the United States. It's very close to conspiracy.
Is it as bad as I think it is going to be?
No, I don't think. Honestly, I think you would enjoy it more than maybe you think you would. It's not as loony as maybe it sounds.
Yeah. Part of me is like, oh God, is this going to be like the Alex Jones History of the United States?
No, that's kind of what I mean.
Where you're like, what is he talking about?
A little bit of that, but not as much as you think. Actually, I think you might actually enjoy it. I mean, I don't know how accurate any of it is, but it doesn't go off into like completely unfounded conspiracy stuff. Like it definitely uses conspiracy stuff, but stuff that has been confirmed. There have certainly been conspiracies, but it doesn't even deal with. I mean, it's
the Iran Contra conspiracy.
yeah. I don't know.
Stuff that happened. Yeah, I mean, yeah, of course. Yeah.
MK Ultra and
should we just do a conspiracy theory show, or we just?
I would love it.
Where we just list our favorite conspiracy theories.
You just gave Sal a Woody.
So I'm always like, whenever I find a new one and I start reading about it, I'm just like the first time I read about like the MK Ultra stuff, and I was just like, what the fuck? Like one of those things where
MK Ultra is fucking out there, man. Like some of the shit that is documented that is real about that is like, what?
But also it's always like, to me, it's like you can really truly, when a conspiracy truly reaches like its vine ripened, it's when the evidence against it becomes evidence for it. It's truly like the moment that it's like, yes.
It breaks stone fourth wall.
Yeah, it's like we've now entered like a Mobius strip of reasoning where it's like, wait, what are we talking about? Where it's like, yeah, exactly, because it didn't happen. It's like, wait,
so next week we change to around
conspiracies.
Yes.
I just listened to an audiobook called Chaos.
Yeah.
It was this journalist. He worked for Vanity Fair, and he was tapped to do an article on the Manson family murders. Like it was like the 30th anniversary of them or something. And so they sort of tapped him to do that, and he then proceeded to spend like the next decade researching what he found was like evidence that Charles Manson, not that he wasn't involved in it, but he wasn't like it was MK Ultra and like LSD and psychedelic drugs and the CIA and all. And I'm like, and it was really interesting for a while because like, okay, like the first half of the book is him going through the Helter Skelter book, Bugliosi's book, and kind of dismantling it a bit. And truthfully, so like a lot of what he brought up is true. Like there were a lot of weird holes in Bugliosi's case in his book. There was a lot of strange stuff that he's not the first person to bring up, or that factually that does exist. But then all of a sudden it goes from like that, where you could see him sort of flip the switch and go into the whole and with zero evidence,
just go launch like full 100-mile-per-hour.
Yes. And I'm just like, listen to this going, okay, wait a second. I don't think
what just happened. Yeah.
Because it starts out like really solid. Like he's got all this really like good, journalistic evidence about the Bugliosi book, Helter Skelter. And I just happened to reread that book. And there's a lot of weird shit. Like there are some strange things in there of like, like months went by, like where Manson had been picked up and then let go multiple times by his parole officer at a time, like, a year before these murders happened. And just there's a lot of weird shit that definitely, I think more of it was like Bugliosi, creating a case against Manson. There's definitely some strange shit in him creating that case. So there's a lot of evidence that he was able to kind of pull out about it. But then like, when he starts getting into the whole MK Ultra part of it, it's just like, all right, you kind of lost me. I don't know.
Well, before I talk about a comic book, have you ever seen any of John Ronson's stuff with Alex Jones, like way back when Alex Jones
when he went to
when they went to that
not bad
that grove wherever all the rich people go. And that's so great because it's like, it's a bunch of rich people hanging out and like it's like, that's what it is. Like that's
like super powerful rich people like being weirdos, like
like hanging out. And it's like the watching like someone with like that someone who's gone like 100 miles per hour into like insanity is looking at that and being like, oh, it's like satanic. And then John Ronson's just like, yeah, it's like, of course, yeah, it's a bunch of rich people. Are they probably planning some way to like make more money? It's like, yeah, of course they are.
That's what they do.
Yeah, it's not like a hidden conspiracy.
It's what they do.
It's interesting. Like once people seem to like get into the mode of conspiracy theories, like then everything, is a conspiracy. Like you can't look and listen. That shit, that Bachelor, whatever the hell it is, not the Grove,
Bohemian Grove.
Yeah, it is weird. Like I've seen the photographs and video. It's odd, and anyone that would see that would be like, okay, what the fuck is going on? You would definitely think, you know, insidious shit going on, and yeah, it's odd, but yeah, Alex Jones. I mean, and it's funny because John Ronson, is such a level-headed guy.
Yeah,
it's like I love all his books. I've read all of
just watching them like creep through the woods, like up to it, and he's like, "Oh, we could just walk up." He's like, "Why are you afraid?"
To the front gate, and they let him in.
Yeah.
Alex Jones is like, he's got walkie-talkies. We're gonna dress in black, and everything's gonna be.
Great. I love it. You know, I gotta find that on YouTube again because I always loved. It was one of my favorite things because it was the first time. It's like early. It's like young Alex Jones, which is funny to think of because you know, he feels like he's been invading my brain space for
too long.
But it's great because it's just such like a perfect example of like that. Like I've now fully revved up to conspiracy mind.
I've figured it out. I've got it all figured out.
I'm watching this and I am like jacked up, ready to go. Like,
yeah, and I love like Ronson sort of questioning him too. Like Ronson just sort of always is the voice of reason.
He's like, why don't you just ask if you can get in?
Didn't he release I thought he released a book, like an audio book on Audible, like a short audible audiobook about that. And like I want to say he did something or released something on it.
He did something about because it's weird because it's from a long time ago.
Yeah.
Where like Alex Jones was a very fringe, like character. He was like not within anyone's like sphere of like of knowing he exists. And now he's like,
how did he hook up with Alex Jones? Like, how did that even
because John Ronson did a show that was about like UFOs and conspiracy theories, which was a great show. It used to be I used to see it on BBC America. And it was great because John Ronson's totally like extremely level-headed. And like he does a really great job of like being empathetic. Like he gets the people to talk to him. Like he's not like standoffish. But he also is like
he doesn't like make them feel shitty about their opinions.
But he does like what do you mean when you're saying that the prime minister is a lizard? You know?
Exactly.
I mean, like literally a lizard, or do you mean like
metaphorically a lizard? Or
it's like no, like literally a lizard. He's literally. Oh, okay. Yeah, so I gotta find those shows, but it's great because he's so good at being level-headed and like continuing the line of questioning and being like, what do you mean that it's this or that? Like he's great at it.
Did you read The Men Who Stare at Goats?
Yes.
Oh my God. That's like the movie's okay.
Yeah.
That book is like unbelievable. Like you get into it and it's like, really? Like this is real. Like this isn't made up. This isn't fiction. Like it's insane to think of what was going on with some of these and like how and the thing I laugh about it with is because like every time he would describe that one dude, I can't think of his name, but like the one guy who was the sort of original trainer of the PsyOps. And it's like all I could keep thinking was like these are the dudes that opened up like karate dojos in the 80s.
Yes, yeah.
Like that was that dude.
Yes, sensei.
Yes.
He does a great job of capturing that vibe of like, what are these dudes talking about? Like,
Chris, if you've never read that book, it is
I need to read it. I've seen the
so
movie.
good. It is a great audiobook, but it is absolutely insane to think that our government, like at one point, was legitimately like developing soldiers to be like psyops,
yeah,
you know,
some scanner shit.
yeah, like scanners.
Someone saw scanners.
Like, yeah, I mean, and when you read the book, it's like the guys that were in that it was like con men. They were like,
Yeah,
they got conned. The government, like these soldiers, these military dudes, were so afraid. Because I think that's what it came down. It's like they were so afraid that they were losing some unseen war.
yeah,
That they were willing to believe that a guy could kill you with his mind.
yeah. It was just like they got totally just conned.
Yeah, just
And just yeah,
hoodwinked by these fucking, like wannabe special forces dudes. It's insane. It's so crazy.
Who wrote it?
John Ronson, Ronson.
That's John Ronson.
He wrote that. He wrote So You've Been Publicly Shamed, which is a phenomenal book.
Them Adventures with Extremists is awesome.
Yeah, Adventures with Extremists. He's got a few more.
Psychopath Test.
What?
Psychopath Test.
Oh yeah, that one's really good. Yeah, Psychopath Test is great. The one he did an audiobook called the Last Days of Autumn.
Oh yeah,
about the porn star that she ended up
committing suicide.
Yeah, well,
or yeah,
you're not sure, but that was a tough listen. That was like that's a dark fucking book, man. But yeah, he's a really excellent.
YouTube, and I put it in our online chat, A Human Effigy, how Ron Johnson and Alex Jones managed to successfully break into the Bohemian Grove.
Oh yeah, Alex Jones. The funny thing is, like, there was a time where Alex Jones was super entertaining. You know what I mean? Like, he was when he wasn't.
Yeah.
When you didn't like think he believed all this, like it was just like, oh, this is just entertainment. This is just, he's just kind of being funny but then it was like, oh, wait a minute. This guy like he really believes in this.
Well, one of I used to I loved Art Bell when I was a kid.
Yeah.
I used to love it, but now when I listen to old Art Bells, I actually get kind of sad because now I think about like, oh shit, this is where it started, where like people were too dumb to like
it was entertainment.
Yeah, or to know, like, are incapable of discerning like reality from
entertainment.
And I'm like, ugh. I used to, well, it's only the perspective of now, like I enjoy them, but then you hear them and you're like, oh no, like,
right.
Like well, I'm starting to...
I mean, how many Bigfoot shows are we going to have on the History Channel? Like, what the?
Yeah, I know, right?
What
like,
kind of history is that exactly?
All right, here we go. We're gonna find Bigfoot. Yeah, I mean, it's funny. It's funny and sad. To chart like the weird entertainment, how entertainment is fed into like people not being able to like discern what's real.
Well,
or like
a book you should. I'm listening to it right now. It's called Broadcast Hysteria, and it's about the Orson Welles War of the Worlds podcast. And it does a great job of putting that in context and then sort of examining why it became such a phenomenon, because like the conceit is sort of like not that many people really listen to it. How did it become such a like global fascination? Because over the years, it seemed like it was much bigger than it really was. But then it puts it in context, and like just briefly, I don't want to get into it too much, but like one of the interesting thing about it was like before that, like there were like radio shows. Radio was extremely powerful. There wasn't TV at the time, So radio was incredibly powerful medium, but like the news organizations, CBS specifically, like they took it very serious where they would not play a recording of events. They felt that that was disingenuous to the public. So if they didn't have a live reporter at a historical event, they would not play a recording of it. And that changed with the Hindenburg.
Mm-hmm.
That was really the event where it was like such a big thing that they felt like, okay, we'll play the recording. But even then they were like, we have to make this clear. This is, 12 hours ago this happened.
Mm-hmm.
And then it just sort of like slowly changed and eroded a bit. And then there was like the March of Times was a show on CBS where they would do voice actors. They would have impersonators, and they were incredibly talented and voice impressionists who would do like Teddy Roosevelt or whoever, and to the point where people didn't necessarily know that it wasn't the real person, but they did it it was an entertainment. They considered it entertainment. That's how they kind of got away with it.
Mm-hmm.
Or how they justified it. Like this isn't just straight news.
Yeah,
this is entertainment, and people loved it. But then Wells took it one step further, but it was interesting, like the context of like seeing how the sort of integrity of news reporting just started to break down over time because it was funny. It was the advertising dollars became more important than the truth necessarily, and it started off small little things, but then it just yeah.
It was Orson Welles' fault. Everything. So Fox News is Orson Welles' fault.
You could go there. I guess you could
or whatever.
Yeah, it's an interesting read in today's context for sure. I haven't finished it yet, but it's that's like the first couple of chapters is that sort of historical context.
Mm-hmm.
And then it goes into sort of like, why people maybe were so affected by it, and it just gives you a really good idea of the time.
Very cool. So I guess we can wrap up Tiananmen 1989.
It's a good book.
Hey, it's been a lot of conversation.
It obviously is a book that can spur a lot of conversation.
More conversation than Doomsday Clock, which I've tried to read for the third time and failed.
So you're telling me I should not.
There's like comics review.
So put off the order on the hardcover on Doomsday Clock.
Yeah, where I'm just like, oh boy.
Yeah, this was good, Tom. I enjoyed it.
Cool. I'm glad I could share it.
Yeah, absolutely. I even got my wife to read it.
There you go.
Yeah.
Don't have her read Doomsday Clock.
Yeah.
I don't think there's any danger of that.
Yeah, we can get into that some other time. I keep trying to read it because I feel like I should. I fail every time at different points. I'm just like, it starts off, Jeff Johns shouldn't be writing like Rorschach, rambling. Like, it's not your realm. Don't do it.
It's not your thing.
That's Alan Moore's thing. Just let Alan Moore be,
Yeah.
Like, know what you're good at.
They just can't leave it the fuck
alone. And I'm just like, please, no, don't start this way. I've tried to read it multiple times, and it always starts off. I think the next time I try and read it, I'm just gonna skip the first like 8 pages because that always puts me like just in like my frame of mind just becomes like, oh, okay, here we go. Let's like, all right.
Just stick to Stargirl, John.
Yeah. I'm just like, I mean, it's kind of unfair for the poor book because I watched the Watchmen show on HBO, and sure, like it wasn't perfect, but I was entertained by it.
Well done. I mean,
it was very well done. It had like it had like an ambitious approach to it, whether it worked or not. Like it was going for something big, and like, and you read Doomsday Clock and you're just like, oh no, it's just like another Rorschach. and then like Superman's in it, and then it's just like, oh no, like, I don't like where this is going. It's just like, so I keep trying to read it because I love Gary Frank's art.
Well, I was a little warned off of it in this respect, in that it's a 12-issue series, and I saw online that people, like, after like issue 10, they're like, oh, it all makes sense now. I'm just like, I don't want to go like,
yeah, I haven't gotten to issue 10 yet.
Into a 12-issue series for any sort of payoff, and then the eventual letdown of the last 2 issues.
To me, though, the problems I have with it aren't necessarily all just like, I don't get it. It's just like weird tone things, and just like the example to me is just like, I don't need like legacy Rorschach, like ramblings written not by
Alan Moore.
I'm just like,
The problem with it is it's like, well, we want to use these characters. We don't really have a story, but let's make up a story just so we can these characters. And it just is not a good way to write a story.
It's just like, what's happening? It's like, here's these other characters, and it's like, why is it like, I don't understand why, like it's a slog would be my.
Okay. Did you guys like the Before Watchmen stuff?
Say that again?
Did you guys like the Before Watchmen stuff?
Some of it was okay. I mean, I didn't think any of it was great.
I thought it was an indictment that they had to basically ask 5 or so different writers to come in and try and capture the voices of characters that Alan Moore had created. And it just kind of showed me, it's like Alan, I mean, that's kind of the brilliance of Alan Moore, is that he was able to do so much with so many different characters. It's like, yeah, Darwin Cook doing the Minutemen and the original Night Owl makes sense. And he can do that. And so maybe we need Brian Azzarello to write Rorschach. And so
it was like all okay, but sort of inconsequential.
Okay. It was
like,
the story's been told. Like, there doesn't need to be. It's a perfect fucking comic book story. It doesn't need to be. Nothing more needs to be told about it. Like, it doesn't. There's nothing you're gonna add to it to make it better. So you're just like you're fucking dragging the corpse of it around, Weekend at Bernie's style, and just trying to make money. I mean, that's all. The reason there was 8 different writers and 8 different artists on 8 different books is not
8 number ones.
Yeah, because they just didn't do one book. Yeah, you got fucking exactly like.
Tuesday Clock is the Weekend of Bernie's.
Well, it's just also like, I guess to me, I haven't read it's been a while since I read the Before Watchmen stuff. So I'm going to say this, and maybe I'm wrong, but I guess if I was to say, like, you're going to use the Watchmen characters in a comic book, I would think you want a bigger ambition than what they've done with them. Like I guess, I haven't finished Doomsday Clock, but one of my criticisms of why I find it so hard to read is that it feels so sort of ambitionless, other than like, these characters interact with our heroes, and that's like you said, that's its sole purpose.
Yeah.
There is no other, like, it doesn't feel like there's any other like reason, or like, again, maybe unfair to compare it to the TV show, but the TV show had like an ambition of what it was trying to like be, and like, it was like, oh, okay, like, this takes place in that place. It's not just trying to necessarily drag around the characters the whole time, or like, there was like something they were aiming for that was justified using those characters in a way, for me at least, right?
Yeah,
the comic stuff
on the HBO show, I feel like they told their story. Do you feel like bringing that back for a second season would kind of be doing what comics has done, is kind of, you know, tugging on that string and telling more of a story that doesn't need to be told.
I don't know. I just
I
feel
think
like
if you're going to do a second season, you just need to do it with other characters. Like do another, you know what I mean? Like this was a small, this was a piece of the Watchmen world, but it was a legacy of something else. You know what I mean? Like it was, I mean, that the TV show Watchmen was a story about something bigger than those characters, which is what Watchmen is. It's a story, but it's bigger than those characters.
Yeah.
Like the story Alan Moore wanted to tell was about comics and about the problem.
It do think it's like the opposite. It is so much just a kind of a modern comic. Like it's like exactly 180 the other way.
But even like the TV show is a story about racism in comics. And you know what I mean? Like that's what that story is about. Okay, now let's tell that story with these characters in this world. It's not, hey, let's tell a story about John Osterman and Rorschach, and then because we want to use those characters, and then let's figure out a story to tell. And like that's the problem is we want Superman to fight, you know, Dr. Manhattan. Well, that's a really fucking lame, you know, use of a like those characters aren't characters. They're not just characters. They're, you know, they're analogs for
represent them.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Like, so it's stupid to like treat them.
I think you've described 100% accurately why I cannot finish Doomsday Clock, because I'm just like, oh, it's like, have you guys ever seen the movie Less Than Zero, the adaptation of the Bret Easton Ellis novel?
I know.
Robert Downey Jr.
It's one of the classic examples, and this is a perfect example. It's like someone read the book and didn't understand it. It's like the things they change in the movie. I'm like, but you changed like the thing the book's about. like you.
We're talking about James Spader.
Yeah, Robert. Like in the book, Robert Downey Jr.'s character dies. In the movie, he's alive. It's a monumental difference of how the. Like
in the movie,
he lives in the movie.
No, he dies at the end, right?
I don't know. Let me look it up. It's been a long time since I've seen it.
He dies.
Let me see it. Something happens that's the exact opposite of the book.
Is it McCarthy? Is it Andrew McCarthy?
Andrew McCarthy, isn't it?
Andrew McCarthy. James Spader is the drug dealer, right?
Oh my god, it's been like 15 years since I've seen it.
It's an old fucking movie.
It's not very good. Book's good. All right. Either way, whatever. Something happens in the movie adaptation that I'm like, wait a second. Like, what? Like, I think you misunderstood what the book's about. And I feel like Doomsday Clock's a little bit of that, where it's like, oh yeah, Dr. Manhattan, he'd be a perfect person to fight Superman. Like,
no. What's the problem with like sequels? Like, you know, a lot of times like a sequel to a movie or a book, like you get like, you know, a franchise of books or something. It's like the issue is like, well, we love these characters so much, but you don't understand that we want to see more of it. But what you don't understand is the reason you love those characters so much is because they were about a story, not about the characters. You know what I mean? Like, it was a really good story that had something to say, and that's why you like those characters. But then it became like storytelling became just about characters. I mean, especially in comics, you know, modern superhero comics are just about characters. There's very little storytelling in modern day comics. Like,
what is the story of Peter Parker? You know, it's not that much different than it was 70 years ago.
Well, not only just that, but like, what is the last like comic book you read where that was like, oh, that was a really interesting story that had something to say?
Well,
You know, what I mean? Like, when was the last, outside of like Tiananmen 1989, because obviously that's, but I'm saying like a superhero comic book or a modern comic book. When was the last time you read a comic book that was like that really had something to say? Not to say that they don't exist.
like The Boys.
I just want to interrupt to say that I got it switched around. In the movie, he dies. In the book, he doesn't.
Oh, okay. I was gonna say.
So when I saw the movie, I was like, but I thought the point of that character is that he doesn't ever suffer any repercussions from or he doesn't die. Like, it's like he's fucked up, but like it's not like he dies, right? So you're just sort of left in this space of like, does he ever really, like, is he ever really have any sort of repercussions for what he does? And it's like in the movie, they're like, he definitely does. He dies. And it's like, oh, okay. I think you misunderstood what this book's about.
Yeah. I mean, well, like, another sort of classic example, and I can't think of the differences necessarily, but like Bonfire of the Vanities.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, like, is this amazing novel, and the book is like, the movie is like the opposite of what the fucking novel is trying to tell you. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's so poorly done. It's like you didn't understand the theme of this fucking book. You know, like I just think like people fall in love with characters, and they just don't understand a lot of times the reason you love a character isn't because that's a cool character. I mean, it's like the opposite of a Schwarzenegger movie. Like, nobody watches a Schwarzenegger movie because of the plot. You know, it's just like, oh, Arnold Schwarzenegger's a badass and he's going and kicking everybody's ass and blowing people up, and it's like, oh, awesome. And it's like we kind of treat every character that way now. You know what I mean? Like, we just want that character over and over and over again doing the same thing. And none of it has anything to do with a real fucking story.
Yeah. So, Sal, you are not a Doctor Who fan. Tom, maybe a little bit.
Yeah, I've seen some Doctor Who in my day.
So, I mean, we talked before about the arc of the new Doctor Who actor. It's been the same since probably since the 70s, but certainly since the Chris Eccleston the reboot has been, Doctor is coming to end of story arc. They announced new Doctor. Internet goes crazy, talks about how this is the worst choice ever, and they will hate this actor and this decision forever. Then they slowly develop an affinity, love this Doctor. Doctor comes to end of arc. They announce new Doctor. Now, worst decision ever, and rinse and repeat. And it's all about kind of what Sal was saying. It's like it's this love of character over story, and it's the stories that end up making people fall in love with the characters again.
But they think it's the character. I think it's
the cycle over and over and over again.
Yeah, it's a weird, like, I don't know how we've sort of, like, when that changed so much, where it's just like, and like I said, in superhero comics, it's the worst. Like, when was the last time anyone wrote a fucking, like I said, a Spider-Man comic that meant anything? You know what I mean? Like that made you think about anything, that made you like change your perspective on anything. I mean, when was the last time anything happened in a Spider-Man comic book story that was like, that you remember, that is even memorable? It's always just like, oh, that was when he fought that guy, or that was when, you know what I mean? Like, it's never like, I mean, the only time that it even comes close to being memorable is when someone dies, but that's not memorable anymore because they just come back and we know they're just going to come back. It's like, there's no, and not that there's no repercussions, but it's just like nobody's writing stories with these characters about like any kind of, any perspective on anything. Like, this is what I think I'm going to tell it in this story. That was Alan Moore was, this is what I think about comics. Okay, now I'm going to write a comic book to tell you what I think about comics. And I'm going to make it really entertaining, and you're going to fall in love with these characters. But it's like, that's the perfect, like, people fell in love with Rorschach. Like, he became an popular character. And it's like, wait a minute, you're not.
Yeah, you don't get it.
Yeah, you're not getting what he's trying to say with that character. Like,
yeah,
and that's not, I mean, I don't even think that that's that bad, because honestly, like, there are things about Rorschach that is admirable in certain ways. You know what I mean? Like his tenacity and his, like protecting his friends. There were things about him that were admirable, but it was like people just like, he's a badass. And it's just like he became the thing. I was like, well, no, this is the reality of Batman. This is Batman would be insane. An insane.
Well, he'd be eating beans out of a can and he'd smell bad.
This is something I've always kind of wondered and questioned. Do you think that Alan Moore was Rorschach any sort of like, was it a love letter? Was it a love letter is the wrong term to Steve Ditko? I mean, because that
sure. I mean, he was
in a lot of ways Steve Ditko. It is the Mr. A character, even more so than Ditko's question. I mean, it was Mr. A.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's that moral relativity that,
black and white.
Yeah, there's no in between. There's only one solution to any problem, and yeah, absolutely. I think that was all of those characters in some way or another. I mean, it's like, he was originally going to use all those Charlton characters.
Yeah, I don't know enough about Captain Atom, to be like, what it's,
Captain Atom was a patriot. Captain Atom was a soldier, and then he became incredibly powerful. He was a walking nuclear missile that worked for the government. Who does that sound like? You know what I mean? Like it's
Manhattan. Yeah.
Dr. Manhattan. That was. Yeah, so I mean, I think those, but it's also Superman if you choose to make Superman that character. Superman has been that ultimate, truth, truth, justice, and the American way. You know what I mean? So it's like you can. I think with Moore, it was just the idea of like, these are infantile people. You're the idea that somebody's going to be a billionaire playboy and get dressed up at night in black leather as a bat and run around beating people up is insane. Like, you would have to be crazy to be that person. You know what I mean? Like, you would have to be a crazy, and then the other thing of like someone getting the power of a god. There's no way that you can relate anymore to the human existence. What is that going to do to someone? You know what I mean? Like it's the dichotomy of like Superman, because he grew up on a farm in Kansas with two loving parents, he became this symbol of justice and truth. And even though he has the power to rule the entire planet or fly off and never see it again, he stays here and he beats up guys who are businessmen.
He beats up slumlords.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Like, that concept is so silly if you look at it like an adult. It's just such a silly thing to imagine any human being who would not be corrupted by the ultimate power of a god. That's ridiculous. That's so ridiculous to think that. No, it's cynical. Alan Moore was being very cynical with his work with Watchmen, but I think that was sort of the industry had gotten him to that point. You know what I mean? I think, so, but he wasn't writing these characters because they were cool or he thought they were amazing characters. It's like, these are the things that I want to say about this industry, and I'm going to write a story about that. And that's a true storyteller, where it's not like, well, and I'm not trying to shit on like comic book writers that are working today and writing stories. because it's a really tough thing, I think.
They're trying to create content. They're just trying to create content.
Yeah, they're just trying to create content, and to try and compare people to Alan Moore is silly, but to then take that story and those characters and go, well, let's just make more stories with these characters so they're really cool, interesting characters. Like completely ignores the idea or what Watchmen is all about. You know what I mean? Like, it's just so ridiculous. Now, I wasn't one of the people that was like, oh, DC's a fucking horrible bunch of people, or all those creators are assholes for fucking shitting on
comics, man.
It is what it is. Like Alan Moore used other people's creations to write his stories.
Sure.
And I think they did the best they can, but it's just another example of like, that is how good Alan Moore is. He's the best comic book writer who's ever lived, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And you just see it over and over again because nobody fucking comes close. Nobody has even come close to Watchmen in 40 years. Yeah. Nobody's even fucking come close. Same ballpark.
I'll also say that I don't like seeing other people draw the Watchmen characters as much as I like Dave Gibbons. it's not only story wise, but like there's something unsettling.
Even Gary Frank.
Yeah, where it's just like, this is a little too superhero. Like it's a little too.
Yeah,
like
it's like they just need to remain in that little.
You're in Superman world, where like this is how superheroes look. Like it just, I don't know. There's something about it that feels like just like diminished returns on something.
Yeah, it's I did it. That was I brought up the before Watchmen stuff, and some of that stuff was fine, some of it was not fine. It felt okay to me for Darwin Cook to draw the Minutemen, like the 1940s, 1950s stuff. It's like yeah, that works. That feels fine to me. But there were some other stories there. I was just like, yeah, no, I don't need to see J.G. Jones, drawing Rorschach or whatever. But that one worked. You bring up Superman and the ridiculousness of that character, and one of the things I always think back on, and this kind of comes to real life, is that understanding villains and supervillains, and I don't think it's ever been explained to me better than understanding that the best villains think that they are the heroes of their own story. It's like Lex Luthor is the hero in his story because he's trying to save us all from Superman. And I think understanding that perspective makes you understand villains better, is that they are the heroes in their story. And
well, that's just everyone, like everybody thinks they're doing things the right. Like, I don't think there's very many people out there that are like, those people are serial killers and like psychotic, that are aware of what they're doing is horrible.
Yeah.
Most people that have done horrible things think that they're doing it for the benefit of, something.
It makes you understand people better. And that's one thing that comics does. If you look at that, it helps you understand people's motivations a little bit more. There's a long way to go for something really cool that I listened to almost by happenstance. Marta and I went to a book club here in Milwaukee that they do this in parks, and we got to the park and it's in Shorewood, and apparently they didn't allow pets in the park, and I had one of our dogs with us, and so I'm just like, okay, you go to the book club, I'm just gonna go walk with Parker. And I was like, okay, I'll find a podcast to listen to and go out. And so David Tennant, bringing this back to Doctor Who, David Tennant does a podcast now, and it's called David Tennant Does a Podcast With. And so he has a different guest for every podcast. He did an hour interview with Stacey Abrams, and it was like my entertainment and political worlds colliding kind of stuff, and just hearing Tennant talk with Stacey Abrams. First of all, she's a huge nerd, which I never knew.
Who is Stacey Abrams?
Stacey Abrams barely lost to Brian Kemp to be the governor of Georgia. She was on the by all accounts, she was on the short list for Joe Biden as a vice presidential candidate. She's one of the rising stars in the Democratic Party. She will run for president at some point. Really fascinating person, and to hear her kind of in a podcast environment that she could kind of relax and talk about like her geekdom was kind of interesting. But then as she kind of talked, and that what I loved about it is that how her geekdom influenced her politics. And, you know, I look at like Doctor Who as something that influenced me a great deal growing up, of just in, you know, standing up to oppression and, you know, thinking your way out of a situation before you shoot your way out of it. You know, recognizing, you know, autocracy and
sounds pretty un-American to me.
It pretty much, but listening to her talk about like her, do what?
So it is a British show.
It is a British show, but it's worth the 52 minutes or whatever. And yeah, she, you know, she goes down. She compares herself to the Hulk, you know, in her politics. You know, she says, "Yeah, I'm angry all the time. That's my secret, but I can't show it. But I am angry all the time." You know, just so yeah, it was good. It was a really good podcast listen, and it was this realization that, as you know, now I'm a mid-40s white guy who's loved sci-fi and fantasy and geek culture my entire life. There's a generation of people coming up behind us that was not as far out of the mainstream and have really been influenced by that, and not just people, but like political leaders who Doctor Who is a big influence on them. That was insanely cool to me.
I don't know if that's a good thing.
It's a great
I don't know if it is. I honestly don't know if it is. I think pop culture, and especially like comics and fantasy and sci-fi and all that stuff that we grew up with is such a, I think it can create such a unrealistic concept of, this is right and wrong, or
you're talking about the unattainable utopia that
I think like, but it also like creates this idea of there is like some universal balance of justice in the world, or like there is going to always, like, goodness is always going to win out in the end.
Yeah,
I think it's really.
You just read a book that kind of said that it doesn't.
No, it rarely does. It rarely does. But I think like surrounding yourself by that stuff, which I did, all my life, it can create sort of this idea that there's going to be some hero to save us from.
Oh, that's the wrong takeaway.
No, I know, that's what I mean.
Yeah,
but
wrong. That's what leads us to Trump, is that there's someone that's going to save us. That's the wrong thing, and that's the Lex Luthor thing, right? Is like, no, there is no savior. I'm going to save you from this person who says that he's going to save us. Yeah,
like, that's what it's like. Biden's the savior of.
No, absolutely not. he's just not the other guy.
I don't know.
Yeah, well, I tell you what, we're getting close to the end of our time tonight. So, Sal, have you picked out a book for us to read here over the next month or so?
Yeah, of course. It's going to be Immortal Hulk, Volume 1.
No, no, we've already done that one.
Doomsday Clock.
Doomsday Clock Volume 1 and 2.
We're gonna force Tom to read this whole thing. Just get sadder and sadder as he goes through it.
Watchmen.
Actually, no, I don't know.
Come on, pull the trigger. Make a fucking decision.
Relax. Jeez. Why it's not that
He's
serious.
going through his Amazon wish list right now.
Yeah, I am. I'm trying to figure it out. I don't want to buy anything. I got stuff. Oh, no. I don't know if you guys want to read that or not.
Final Crisis.
No, I don't know. Give me till next week. I'll figure it out next week. You don't need to know today. What's the difference?
Shirking of responsibility.
Fine. Then we're gonna read. No, that's a piece of shit. I don't want to read any of this stuff. It's all terrible.
This is all awful. Well, Sal is trying to figure this out. If you have any suggestions on what we should read, or comments on the show, or just want to shoot us a message, you can do so at info@aroundcomics.com. You can also look us up on the Facebooks and the Instagrams and all of that stuff, and drop us a message. You can watch along on YouTube on usually Sunday nights around 8 p.m. Central Standard Time. And those are all of the little plugs I have. We have merchandise, which is where, Sal?
Roundcomics.com/shop.
You can get a coffee cup or a shirt or a hat.
All sorts of good stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah,
All right.
I got nothing.
You
I
need
don't
a
know.
week, don't you?
Huh?
You need a week, don't you?
Give him his time. I don't want him to rush into something and then I got to read it. And
Yeah,
be like, oh, this sucks. And then we have a book. We discussed a book and we're all like, it's not good.
It's not good, Sal.
It's not good.
He's done that to us before.
I don't want to just pick something that I haven't thought about a little bit. And
Yeah.
I don't know if it's any good, so it's like, I don't know.
You've picked books before, and you've been like, and we've talked about it, and you're like, yeah, I really didn't like it. I'm just like,
yeah,
it happens. Oh man.
Whether I wanted to pick something like new
Doomsday Clock Volume 2.
I didn't know if I wanted to pick something new or pick something old. What would you guys prefer? Like something like new that we haven't read, or something old that maybe we've read a long time ago?
I never mind a revisit on things.
That was sort of a give me till next week. I'll figure it out.
That's fine.
Too much pressure. I can't take
Yeah, that's fine.
We're okay with that. All right. Anything else here before we sign off for the week?
No, I think that's been more than enough for one goddamn week. Not enough venting.
I got to talk about Doomsday Clock.
I did like that me and Tom kind of got in an argument. That was kind of fun.
It was. I was.
Yeah, you gotta give the fans some tension, right? Can't agree all the time.
No, I know. We've been doing it for like 15 years. I don't think we've ever really.
There might have been something.
There might have been, yeah.
Yeah.
There was that time in New York.
What happened in New York?
I don't know. We were drinking.
I was freezing. I remember that.
Yeah.
I had to buy a I Love New York sweater.
Yeah. So what I remember about us going to New York is that we had basically spent about a week together at that point, and we get off the airplane, and so Sal has to drive home, but Tom and I can both get home on the train. And I look at Tom, and I was like, "So Tom, you want to ride on the same train together?" And he's like, "No, not really."
I just want to be by myself.
Really just need to not see you for a while.
Yeah, just we've been spending a lot of time together.
You're exhausting.
Yeah.
I was thinking about that earlier this week. So, all right. On that note, we will be back next Sunday.
Hey, I might have a book.
Oh no!
Did you guys ever read Starlight by Mark Miller, Gordon Parlov?
Oh,
Yeah.
That's
It's sort of his
Punisher Max guy, right?
yeah,
Parlov?
Gordon Parlov.
Yeah.
This is sort of his take on like John Carter Mars, sort of.
Yeah. I can do that.
It's pretty good. All right, let's do that. I like that book.
Okay. Starlight Volume 1. Is there only one volume?
Only one volume. Yeah, it's 6 issues. It's a complete story. Yeah, I think you might like it.
All right. Cool. Starlight.
Starlight.
Nice.
Amen.
All right. So we'll read that. So yeah, guys, always good to talk with you. We check us out on the Facebook group and all of the social media. Send us any messages, your thoughts on Tiananmen 1989. What do you say?
I said follow me on TikTok. Yeah.
Tom's dance moves. All right. We will
Do
do
the
that.
Around Comics dance. We come up with a signature.
The robot. We'll be back next Sunday to talk about everything that's happened in the world of comics. Probably not, just what we've read. In the meantime, bless you, Sal.
In between time.
We'll be everywhere in
And around.
comics. Yay! These are ridiculous. Nice.
I was doing pull-ups.